I tend to make a video like this every 3 to 6 months because that is almost perfectly in line with when Destiny hits the shitter, whether it's just weird decisions that Bungie's making from a development standpoint, sandbox imbalances, or the overall general lack of content throughout the game. Usually it's received with either a lot of hate or a lot of people agreeing, but either way, I just want to preface that I love the game. I want the game to be best that it can be. I just make these videos because I like talking about the game and want to get other people's feedback as well. So that being said, none of this is scripted. I have a few bullet points that I want to cover, talking about the current state of the game, and that's it. First things first, I wanted to start with the lack of any form of good content in this game that gives it any form of replayability from the seasonal model perspective. I'm not talking about raids, I'm not talking about dungeons or lost sectors or even story missions or anything like that, just specifically these seasonal model activities, which are things like deep dives, salvage, and even frankly fishing for this season because it was added specifically for Season of the Deep and tied to an exotic quest. Bungie always releases each and every season without fail the next super boring activity like a deep dive, a catch crash, a salvage, a psyops battleground, whatever the hell it may be, and it's just super boring and nobody really likes playing it, and they would be way better off, in my opinion, releasing something that might take a risk and it might flop completely, but at least it has a chance to succeed rather than just playing it safe and giving us the same thing over and over again. I've always gone to the same example of just giving us a horde-based mode. It would be perfect for just grinding the game endlessly, having people go for like a high round. You could have leaderboards tied to it so people could compete for a high round where they get escalating difficulty for ads, increased champions, maybe bosses. You do the same thing with like a boss-only gauntlet. You could have it have like roguelite modes. You go in and whatever loot you get to drop is what you get to use and keep going that far. You could have 10 or 20 round speedrun modes to see how fast you could get and complete like 10 or 20 rounds. You could put in one single piece of content into the game, which is a horde-based mode, and have 10 to 15 different modes within that mode alone, and you could keep expanding upon that within additional seasons as well to really refresh the game and just give it replayability. And those systems are never added, and it makes zero sense to me. I also want to make it very clear, I'm not putting down anyone who develops the game on a day-to-day basis. I think the developers are extremely hardworking and extremely talented. Everything that they work on usually comes out extremely well done, like the player models, the weapons, a lot of the assets currently in the game, especially things from like an aesthetic standpoint. I think the problem arises from the higher level decisions that are made in terms of game design rather than game development, where decisions are being made for the future of the game, for current seasons or whatever, that happen without a lot of forethought. That ties in with the second overall point that I wrote down, which is the fact that Bungie is always making weird or completely illogical decisions for the game, at least from my point of view. Back to the point of swimming sections in deep dives, salvages, and even in the brand new dungeon that was released, all it does is artificially lengthen the game, increasing the amount of time that you're spending in activities, bored as all hell. I think it was a cool thing to add to the game from a certain perspective. If you're making a Season of the Deep, which is surrounding fishing and going deep in the archaeology, sure, having a water section seems like a good, cool idea, but then making it so that you're just running around, falling and traveling super slow is super boring. It takes forever. And I feel like it's a decision that would have had to have been thought up and then slowly implemented over time, and then somebody should have come along and been like, hey, this sucks, we shouldn't do this. Other decisions, for example, are things like the lack of artifice armor in master raids. There's really no point to ever go into master raids, and the fact that you get artifice armor through master dungeons kind of makes no sense when master raids are supposed to be harder and should probably have better loot. And then stuff like strand meditations, having to earn strand meditations and buy each and every fragment on each and every class, and only earning strand meditations as you're specifically usually playing with strand. I know there's other ways to earn them, but typically you just need to have strand on, and forcing you to those subclasses, especially when they come out and they're not meta, it just makes no sense. It could have been done way better, and it's just simple decisions like that that really hurt the quality of life of the game, just make it worse. The third thing I wanted to talk about is awkward difficulty scaling across the entirety of the game, where something that's supposed to be hard is very easy, and something that's very casual or should be very casual ends up being tedious to deal with, or in some cases pretty hard as well. A good example for something that's easy that ends up being hard is Ghost of the Deep. You go in, it's a dungeon, it should be a pretty casual activity. It's a 3-man. You go in of power, not under power, and the moths still destroy you. I know you can spend the time to shoot them, but that's super boring and just makes the activity tedious. And on top of that, the boss health pools are really large. The final boss can absolutely fry you, and it also moves around a lot. I know you can like Arbalest and Tether to try and freeze it in place. Sometimes that works, sometimes it honestly doesn't work. It can prevent the boss from like TPing, but it can still dodge your rockets. And like, other than using a tracking rocket, there's really no good way to deal with a moving boss when it doesn't have a set pattern that you can adapt to, and the movement is just seemingly random. Root of Nightmares, on the other hand, at least for contest mode, was supposed to be the pinnacle endgame activity in the game, at least for this entire year, basically, from a new raid perspective, where you have to figure out all the new mechanics, and it was a complete joke. The first 2 encounters were super easy. The mechanics were pretty much the exact same for the entire raid, other than planets. Planets was pretty easy to figure out, and then on top of all that, you could 2-phase bosses during day 1. You could have no ammo issues. That is the pinnacle endgame content in the game, the hardest thing we're ever going to get, and it was way too easy. Overall, with difficulty, I think a lot of people would agree they want mechanical difficulty where you have to balance doing mechanics, ad clearing, dealing damage at the same time, things like that, rather than artificial difficulty where things are super tanky and one-shot you for no good reason. And that's not me or anyone arguing that the game needs to be difficult in all aspects of the game. There are tons of places where I wish the game was just super easy because I wanted to brain-numbingly farm a legendary or a specific weapon from an encounter. And then there's also still areas where I do want the game to be hard. I think it's a pretty fair perspective to have. The very final thing I wanted to talk about, at least for this video, that I think is a very pressing issue that is kind of killing Destiny right now, is just the lack of transparency and communication between Bungie and the player base. Obviously, I don't think Bungie needs to come out and be completely communicative and 100% transparent. That's up to them as a company, what they want to communicate with people. But I think for a live service game, that communication and transparency helps a ton. Recently, there's been a ton of server issues, and people are super upset because on the off days that they want to actually play the game, they can't play the game. So Bungie is literally just shooting themselves in the foot. And then they go to something like Twitter and you check, and the only line of communication is an official Bungie page or whatever, Bungie help, saying the servers are down. They're going to be down for an hour. There'll be an update in the next hour. And then you get the same stock tweet over and over and over again. You have no idea what's wrong. You have no idea what's causing the issue. And you have no idea when the servers are going to be up. So I think if there was an open line of communication and just transparency and Bungie coming out and saying, hey, this is what's causing the issue. This is why we're running into multiple issues. This is what we're doing to prevent it and fix it and blah, 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 be a lot better. We also just had our second or third ban wave where a lot of speedrunners got banned, which was more than likely due to playing and being falsely banned, while there were server instability issues which falsely flagged them or something like that. Most of them were unbanned, but before they got unbanned, Bungie doubled down, tweeting out that they had made these bans and they were backing them with an appeal form if people did want to send in an appeal. I think most people that got unbanned probably didn't even send in an appeal, which leaves us to question whether or not Bungie went back and double checked their work to see if people were falsely banned and just removed the bans themselves, or if they only unbanned people because others were vocal on things like Twitter and they saw that line of communication from us. But I don't think even like their direct line of communication through the appeal form has ever really helped somebody get unbanned who was falsely banned. And then lastly, when it comes to transparency and communication, this ties in with the second point, which are the weird decisions they make, and the fact that they usually never give a good concrete line of reasoning for those reasons within like their TWAB or now their TWIDs or whatever they're called. A perfect example is something like the Stompy nerf, where when you dodge now, you lose like the entire exotic benefit. That makes no sense. I don't know a single PvE or PvP player asking for that. And then they give some arbitrary line of reasoning for why the decision was made and why that nerf goes into effect. I think it's just very clear that whoever's making these decisions doesn't play the game. They don't play at a high level. They don't understand what's broken in the current sandbox and what needs to be fixed. They just kind of make weird decisions. So again, the transparency and communication on their decision making is just awful in my opinion as well. And if they were a bit more transparent and just, I don't know, communicated better and had that open back and forth between us as a community, I think the game would be balanced way better. That is pretty much it for the video. Hopefully it didn't seem like I was rambling and everything kind of made sense and followed a specific order. Those are the 4 main things that I see causing issues within the game right now and really just killing Destiny. There's no good content when there should be an abundance of readily available content that people want to play, I think they can do it very easily. Maybe that's me not understanding game development, but I don't think that that's the case. They make weird ass decisions for a lot of the game that just doesn't make sense. There's awkward difficulties, which make the game feel weird and awkward to play. And then obviously the transparency, the lack of communication, that's a big issue as well. There's also, I mean, I could also touch on stuff like no loot incentive and other quality of life changes that need to be added to the game, but I think the list could go on and on. Overall, I love Destiny, and when it's like at its peak and when it's something that I want to play, there's no other game I'd rather touch than Destiny at that current point in time. But right now, it feels like the only thing I'm really doing in the game is low mans and speed runs and raiding from time to time just to hang out with friends. And that's me making content for myself, really, not the game having content to play. So anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Like I said, this video wasn't made to hate on the game, just to kind of voice my opinions and get it out there. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace.